In Hong Kong delivered a landslide for pro-democracy candidates in the local elections. 17 of the 18 councils that have historically been in the grip of a Beijing-aligned establishment have been now won by pro-democracy councillors. The results of the otherwise low-key council elections are being seen as a powerful show of solidarity with the city's pro-democracy movement and a rebuke to the government over its handling of the months of escalating violence. Post the stunning rout, Carrie Lam, the embattled chief executive of Hong Kong, vowed to now humbly listen to voters in the semi-autonomous territory. China maintained its stance, reiterating that no matter what happens, Hong Kong is and shall be a part of China. But what do the election results mean for Hong Kong? Why are pro-democracy leaders describing it as people's referendum? And how far will these results take Hong Kong towards a direct representation? These are questions we are going to analyze today in depth. For Sunday's district council elections in Hong Kong, a record 4.1 million people had registered to vote, which is more than half of the population. And a turnout of more than 71% was recorded. That is, more than 2.9 million people cast their votes, as against only 47% in 2015. Of the 452 seats in 18 districts, nearly 400 are now under the control of pro-democracy leaders, as opposed to 2015, when they just over 100 Democrat-leaning candidates had won the seats. In this report, let's analyze the significance of the community-level elections in Hong Kong this time, which otherwise generated low excitement among the voters there. Hong Kong's pro-democracy camp made unprecedented gains in the district council elections, widely seen as a barometer of public sentiment for anti-government protests that have gripped the city since June. Results showed that candidates favoring greater democracy seized a shock majority of China-dominated 18 district councils. 17 of the 18 councils were won by pro-democracy councillors. The winners of the crucial election called the results of the district elections a referendum of people.
It is a genuine referendum of the people of Hong Kong. The candidates from the Democratic camp and allies won this election. Democratic Party hope our chief executive, Mrs. Carrie Lam, received the same message, because the votes make a clear voice of the Hong Kong people. What is the voice? The voice, Carrie Lam and the government should seriously consider the 5 demands of the people of Hong Kong, especially about setting up an independent inquiry about the incidents in the past 6 months. I think it's a very, very clear and loud voice.
Of course, I feel positive to the Hong Kong, but I think that this is still long path of our Hong Kong democratic movement. Yeah, because as you know that we are coming, the local election will be coming in 2020. Yeah, there's still long way to fight, and there are still many youngsters are arrested in the prison. We need to save them. We need to help them. There is a still long path for Hong Kong.
Pro-democracy contestants have had a huge victory. It's been a landslide victory. And so I think going forward, this will be very significant. Many of the pro-Beijing contestants have lost. I think it will be useful to remember that out of the 18 governorates, so far, all of them were controlled by pro-Beijing contestants. This is the first time, number one, that all the 452 constituencies, there were candidates on that, both pro-democracy as well as pro-Beijing, and that the majority now, a very significant majority, is going to be of the pro-democracy.
Both in absolute numbers and in turnout rates, Sunday's vote was the biggest exercise in democratic participation that Hong Kong has seen, with many voters waiting more than an hour to cast their ballots. A record 71% of the 4.13 million citizens who registered to vote cast their ballots, according to Hong Kong's election watchdog. In the year 2015, the turnout was 47%. Despite fears that it could be disrupted or cancelled over the unrest, the election went ahead peacefully. The election was seen as a test of support for the government after months of unrest, protests and clashes.
可能以往建制派佢做嘅嘢，今次令到個情況係冇嗰個有啲改變，咁我哋有啲人可能佢想做啲改變 make a change， 所以有啲人會更加想去改變，同埋好多後生嘅年青人出咗嚟投票啦，我相信係。
其實我覺得政府可以從今次呢個選舉入邊呢，就應該要開始意識到，其實一直咁樣打下落去，未必係一件可以圓滿解決到今次呢個政治問題嘅情況咯。咁其實最主要係今次係區議會選舉啫，下年有埋立法會選舉嘅話，咁其實係咪要到下一次嘅立法會選舉，你先肯真正去聽取翻呢個市民嘅意見？The
government and Beijing had been hoping the election would bring a show of support from the silent majority in Hong Kong, but that did not materialize. Instead, some significant pro-Beijing candidates lost council seats.
我就觉得这一次的选举，说实在是反映了很多市民对于特区政府的不满。这些不满不应该归纳到我们的身上。我们是独立的候选人，我们是为民生工作，但是由于这样的一个气候，把我们独立的议员都纳入到这种。
Before the elections, Hong Kong endured months of mass rallies and violent clashes, initially touched off by anger over a bill backed by CEO Carrie Lam that would have allowed extraditions to China's opaque judicial system. According to political analysts, district council elections typically generate little excitement. The councillors have little political power and mainly deal with local issues such as bus routes and rubbish collection. But this time, the contest for 452 seats took on new political significance because of the public discontent in the city. The vote is the closest Hong Kong gets to direct representation. The territory's legislature is elected by a mix of popular vote and industry groups stacked with China loyalists, which ensures Beijing's control. Some candidates for next year's legislative elections will be drawn from the district councils, and the bodies also will contribute 117 members to the 1,200-strong Beijing-controlled electoral college that chooses the chief executive of the city. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Before the local elections in Hong Kong, protests that began 6 months ago were showing no signs of dying down. It was only the recent days running up to the polls have been some of the most peaceful in recent months. To ensure that the elections were not cancelled, protesters called on the public to exercise restraint. But now that the electoral verdict is out, what lies in store for Hong Kong? And more importantly, how will Beijing react to the results?
17 of the 18 district councils indicates more than a landslide support. But in terms of political power, the writ of these district councillors doesn't extend too far beyond addressing local issues. More importantly, however, these councillors get to choose 117 members on a 1,200-member panel that selects Hong Kong's chief executive in 2022. Another significance of the result is its symbolic value, crystallizing popular anger against the present administration's handling of the crisis. Beijing had bet on what it expected was a more powerful undercurrent of disapproval of the protests. But that was not to be. Instead, high-profile pro-Beijing candidates lost their seats. Pro-democracy activists are hoping their landslide victory will force the government to take their demands more seriously. The Chinese foreign minister has reiterated that no matter what happens, Hong Kong is a part of China.
不管香港发生什么样的事情，香港是中国领土的一部分，香港是中国的一个特别行政区，任何企图搞乱香港，甚至要损害香港的 稳定和繁荣的企图都是不可能得逞的。
Chief Executive Carrie Lam has acknowledged that the results showed dissatisfaction with her administration. She said the government will seriously reflect on the demands of the activists, even as she promised to listen to them with more humility.
District councils are a very important partner of the Hong Kong SAR government in addressing district affairs, in promoting district interests, and also in undertaking many district-based projects. I hereby pledge that the Hong Kong SAR government will continue to fully support the work of the district councils, provide more resources, and listen more attentively to the views and opinions expressed by the district council members on behalf of the local population.
Media observers also speak of challenges for the opposition. The new young councillors will have to address local concerns like public transport and other amenities rather than the more overarching ideal of democracy. They will need to work together more effectively on constructive efforts to ward off potential fatigue in the face of long drawn-out protests and a hardening administration. The election was the first since the wave of anti-Beijing protests began. It saw an unprecedented turnout of more than 71%. Some 2.94 million people voted in the election compared to 1.4 million in 2015. With inputs from Anu Diwan, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Time for a short break here on In Depth, but on the other side, we'll talk in greater detail about the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Do stay with us.
देखिए विशेष मेरे साथ आज शाम 7:30 बजे सिर्फ राज्यसभा टीवी पर।
What are some key legislations introduced in Rajya Sabha? Some of the key legislations introduced in Rajya Sabha are the Indecent Representation of Women Bill 1986, the Indian Succession Bill 1991, and the Marriage Laws Bill 1999.
Welcome back. You're watching In Depth. The protests that have rocked Hong Kong this year have its roots in the umbrella movement, the political movement that emerged back in 2014. The protest derived its name from the use of umbrellas as a tool for passive resistance to the police's use of pepper spray. The demand then was pro-democracy and more transparent elections. The protests this year are an extension of the umbrella movement with an immediate cause, a proposed extradition bill that has since been withdrawn.
Protests in Hong Kong started in June against plans to allow extradition to mainland China. Critics feared this could undermine judicial independence and endanger dissidents. The bill was withdrawn in September, but demonstrations continued as the protesters feared the bill could be revived. They also wanted full democracy and an inquiry into police actions. In the days leading up to Sunday's elections, clashes between police and activists became increasingly violent, with police firing live bullets and protesters attacking officers and throwing petrol bombs. When the extradition bill was withdrawn, protesters said it was too little, too late, and the demonstrations continued, marked by an increasing level of violence.
There have been protests in the past. In 2003 also there were protests by the people of Hong Kong. In 2014 also there were protests by the people of Hong Kong. But this was the first time when the students really got involved. They got associated with these protests, and it started, as I said, about 6 months ago. Basically on the charge that the Hong Kong administrator, she said, Carrie Lam, she said that those who are suspected criminals, that they will be extradited to China, to the mainland, for being tried there. And this, the people there, the Hong Kong residents, particularly the students, the youth, they thought that it was going to be against their freedoms, against their liberties, against their rights, against their independence. And it would also impinge adversely on the independence of the judiciary. And that is why the protest started. They said that they will not agree to that law. That law was withdrawn. First it was suspended indefinitely in June. Then after that it was completely withdrawn in September. But that notwithstanding, the protest continued, and they put forward 5 demands.
So what do the protesters want? They have 5 major demands, one of which, the withdrawal of the bill, has been met. The other 4 are for the protests not to be characterized as a riot, amnesty for arrested protesters, an independent inquiry into alleged police brutality, and implementation of complete universal suffrage.
So the Hong Kong people have been demanding universal suffrage, which means one person, one vote, resulting in the election of the CEO, Chief Executive Officer. This has not happened because the Chief Executive Officer is elected by 1,200 member committee, which is then vetted by the National People's Congress in Beijing, and hence the Hong Kong people suggest that the CEO is not answerable to Hong Kong but is appointed by Beijing's influence.
Hong Kong is a former British colony that was handed back to China as recent as 1997. It has its own judiciary and a separate legal system from mainland China. Rights include freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. However, protesters fear that those freedoms are at stake because the basic law which governs them expires in 2047 and there is no clarity on what Hong Kong's status will then be. With inputs from Anu Diwan, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Let's now give you a brief history of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a semi-autonomous territory with its own currency, passport, immigration channels and a legal system. But it is not independent either. In fact, Hong Kong was never an independent country. Britain controlled the region as a colony until 1997. After that, it was handed over to China with the agreement that there would be a one country, two systems arrangement in place. So let's now take a look at the relationship between China and Hong Kong and how it has changed over the years.
Hong Kong is known to the world as an international financial hub, a business center, shopping paradise, and tourist destination. Historically, Hong Kong's concerns have been anti-communist, not anti-Chinese. Throughout the 20th century, there were many instances of cross-border solidarity, events that can be understood through a timeline, starting with 1842, when China ceded Hong Kong Island to Britain after the First Opium War. Over the decades, thousands of Chinese migrants who fled domestic upheavals settled in Hong Kong. This followed years of upheaval in Hong Kong, after which Britain handed over Hong Kong to China. In 1984, Britain and China signed the Joint Declaration on the conditions under which Hong Kong would revert to Chinese rule in 1997. Under the one country, two systems formula, Hong Kong was to become part of a communist-led country but retain its capitalist economic system and partially democratic political system for 50 years. In 1989, however, Beijing's action against pro-democracy demonstrators in Tiananmen Square led to calls for the introduction of further democratic safeguards in Hong Kong. In 1990, Beijing formally ratified Hong Kong's post-handover mini-constitution or Basic Law. And in April 1992, Chris Patten became the last British governor of Hong Kong who oversaw the colony's handover to China. Patten announced proposals for the democratic reform of Hong Kong's institutions aimed at broadening the voting base in the elections. This led to anger in Beijing. That said, it had not been consulted. In June 1994, Hong Kong's legislature introduced a watered-down version of Chris Patten's democratic reform package. The new legislation fell far short of universal suffrage. In 1995, elections were held for new legislative council. Hong Kong was handed back to Chinese authorities after more than 150 years of British control. Tung Shihua, handpicked by Beijing to rule the territory following the takeover. In 1998, the first post-handover elections were held. In 2004, China ruled that its approval must be sought for any changes to Hong Kong's election laws, giving Beijing the right to veto any moves towards more democracy. In 2004, pro-Beijing parties retained majority in Legislative Council elections, widely seen as a referendum on Hong Kong's aspirations for greater democracy. 2006, tens of thousands of people rally in support of full democracy. Despite the separation in systems and rights guaranteed by the Basic Law, the mainland Chinese government still asserts itself in local Hong Kong politics. In 2014, the region witnessed mass-scale protests against China's proposed reforms for electing the chief executive. Protesters complained that only those candidates who aligned their interests with China are being allowed to run. However, the umbrella protests, as they were known, failed to achieve any concessions from Beijing. In military defense and international relations, Hong Kong differs to mainland China. Hong Kong also has its own legal and judicial systems, district organizations and public servants, broadly based on the British common law model. However, for land tenure and family matters, Hong Kong reverts to the Chinese customary law model. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.